Brenda Teague was busy reviewing her notes when the hum of the car's tires changed pitch on the road beneath her. Brenda glanced up, surprised to see where they were. Mitchell Memorial Causeway already? She put down her notes and gazed out at the calm waters of the Galveston Bay passing beneath her. A heavy fog hovered on the surface. As the warmer air mass passes over the cooler waters, the temperature drops, and the air mass reaches saturation, creating much fog throughout Galveston. I always enjoyed the look of the fog throughout the city's graveyards. Eerie, but peaceful at the same time. Brenda thought to herself. She gazed left, across to the beautiful murals along the side of the Galveston Causeway. She remembered her old friend, an artist named Gabriel. He was responsible for many of the colorful murals and works of art found throughout the city. One memorial reminded her of an Egyptian obelisk. Early that morning at 4:30 a.m., Brenda had plunged into her day as she always did. She did her chores, prayer, meditation and morning yoga. Then around 6, Brenda began her morning ritual of hand-grinding coffee beans. The savoring exotic scent that filled the kitchen soon awoke Christopher and they would sit and enjoy a cup of coffee together. Then it was off to work as always. Little did she know that by evening her day would be less than ordinary. Who calls anymore? Most people send a text message. Here it is 6 o'clock in the evening and I am answering a call. She pondered. Hello. There was no answer on the other end. She hung up, and instantly received a notification of a voice message. Good morning, Brenda Teague, I'm terribly sorry for bothering you so late. The polite voice was noticeably hesitant, with a hint of a southern accent. My name is Travis Joel, and I'm Glen Moody's executive assistant. Mr. Moody told me to call you as soon as possible. He has been trying to reach you all day. As soon as you receive this message, would you be so kind as to call Glen directly? You probably have his new private line, but if not, it's 303-438-1877. Brenda felt a sudden concern for her old friend. Glen Moody was impeccably well-bred and courteous, and certainly not the kind of man to call unless something was very important. Instead of getting that evening coffee with Christopher, Brenda quickly left to her apartment and hurried toward her study to return the call. I hope he's okay, she worried. Glen Moody had been a friend, mentor, and, although at times they had disagreements on matters, they always remained the closest friends. Glen restored her belief that there are still good pastors out there. Brenda's father was a preacher, but he was the reason Brenda had grown further and further from the church. The religious people she grew up with were the most hateful people she knew. But Glen was always there for her. He gave her a loan for her first car, helped her get on her feet, and encouraged her to go after her dreams. Although Glen was one of America's wealthiest people, he was not prideful and too good to be a friend. He was not materialistic. I still remember when we met at his church. I didn't think he would even notice me, but he did. It was the beginning of a truly gratifying friendship. Brenda recalled to herself. Glen's quiet and humble manner belied his powerful heritage. He came from the ultra-wealthy Moody family, whose names appeared on buildings and universities all over the greater Houston area. His father was Mitchell Moody, who was an American businessman and real estate developer, credited with pioneering the economic extraction of shale gas. Glen had inherited the mantle at a young age after the death of his father, and held numerous positions of power. However, his greatest transformation was a profound spiritual experience that made him try to break being associated with his family roots. His passion had become the church he started in Livingston, Texas. Brenda occasionally ribbed Glen about his sterling pedigree to which few people knew about. Now, as Brenda entered her study, she was surprised to see that she had received a fax from Glen, as well. The fax read, Glen Moody, Faith Christian Center, 133, Glory Lane, Livingston, Texas. Good morning, Brenda, I need to speak with you at once. Please call me this morning as soon as you can at 303-438-1877. Regards, Glen Moody. Brenda immediately dialed the number, sitting down at her desk to wait as the call went through. Office of Glen Moody, the familiar voice of the assistant answered. This is Travis. May I help you? Hello, this is Brenda Teague. You left me a message earlier. Yes, Brenda Teague. The young man sounded relieved. Thank you for calling back so quickly. Mr. Moody is eager to speak to you. Let me tell him you're on the line. May I put you on hold? Of course. As Brenda waited for her friend Glen to get on the line, she gazed down at his name atop the fax's letterhead and smiled. Not many slackers in the Moody clan. Moody's ancestral tree burgeoned with the names of wealthy business magnates, influential politicians, and a number of distinguished scientists. Glen's only living family member, his younger sister, Donna, who had apparently inherited the science gene, left the field of science to study Kabbalah. Not sure why anyone would do that, Brenda thought, amused to recall Donna's unsuccessful attempt to explain it to her at a party at her brother's home last year. Brenda had listened carefully and then replied, sounds more like esoteric magic and mysticism. Donna waved her finger playfully. There's not much difference between Christianity and mysticism, Brenda. Now Moody's assistant returned to the phone. I'm sorry, Mr. Moody is trying to get off a conference call. Things are a little chaotic right now. That's not a problem. I can easily call back. Actually, he asked me to fill you in on his reason for contacting you, if you don't mind. Of course not. The assistant inhaled deeply. As you probably know, Ms. Teague, every year we have a faith gathering. The board of the FCC hosts a private gala to thank our most generous supporters. Many cultural elites attend. Brenda knew her own bank account had too few zeros to qualify her as culturally elite, but she wondered if maybe Glen was going to invite her to attend nonetheless. This year, as is customary, the assistant continued, the dinner will be preceded by a keynote address. We've secured the Galveston Island Conference Center for that speech. One of the many venues Glen owns in Galveston. Brenda thought, recalling a political lecture she had once attended. It was hard to forget 500 folding chairs splayed in a perfect arc, surrounded by 38 life-size ice sculptures. The GICC is able to host a group of 1,000 people in the grand ballroom. The problem, the man said, is the chosen speaker has fallen ill and has just informed us they will be unable to give the address. He paused awkwardly. This means we are desperate for a replacement speaker, and Mr. Moody is hoping you would consider filling in. Brenda did a double take. Me? This was not at all what she had expected. I'm sure Glen could find a far better substitute. You're Mr. Moody's first choice, and you're being much too modest. The FCC's guests would be thrilled to hear from you, and Mr. Moody thought you could give the same lecture you gave on KTX radio a few years back. That way, you wouldn't have to prepare a thing. He said the concept of the natural way, as you call it, involving the innate calling within a person to show empathy and compassion sounds absolutely perfect for the venue. Brenda was not so sure. If I recall correctly, that lecture was less than well received. With due respect, ma'am, Mr. Moody believes many of the concepts you raised, and he is sure many of his professional friends will as well who will be in attendance. Brenda mulled over the offer. I admit it would be easy. She thought to herself. She kept the notes from every lecture she'd ever given. I suppose I could consider it. What date is the event? The assistant cleared his throat, sounding suddenly uncomfortable. Well, actually, ma'am, it's tomorrow night. Brenda laughed out loud. Tomorrow night? That's why it's so hectic today. The FCC is in a deeply embarrassing predicament. The assistant spoke more hurriedly now. Mr. Moody is ready to send a private jet to Cairo for you. The flight is just over 14 hours and you would be back in Egypt before you know it. You're familiar with the private air terminal at Al Meza Air Base Airport? I am. Brenda admitted reluctantly. No wonder Glen always got his way. Wonderful. Would you be willing to meet the jet there at say, 10 o'clock. You haven't left me much choice, have you? Brenda chuckled. I just want to make Mr. Moody happy, ma'am. Glen has that effect on people. Brenda considered it a long moment, seeing no way out. All right. Tell him I can do it. Outstanding. The assistant exclaimed, sounding deeply relieved. He gave Brenda the jet's tail number and various other information. When Brenda finally hung up, she wondered if Glen had ever been told no in his entire life. Turning around, she saw Christopher standing in the room next to her. She said, "How about that coffee?" "Absolutely," exclaimed Christopher. Brenda scooped some additional beans into the grinder. A little extra caffeine, she thought. It's going to be a long night.